Welcome to Waterside Chat. Tom Sadler talks with guests who depend on healthy oceans and fisheries for their recreation and livelihoods. And now, let's get started.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to today's Waterside Chat. I'm Tom Sadler, the Deputy Director of the Marine Fish Conservation Network. I am delighted to welcome Tim Bristol of SalmonState to the show. Tim is SalmonState's Executive Director. He lives and works in beautiful, sunny Juneau, Alaska, as he told me while we were in the green room. Tim has an impressive background in conservation. He served as the Alaska Program Director for Trout Unlimited for 10 years. He was the Executive Director of the Alaska Coalition, was a grassroots organizer for the Southeast Alaska Conservation Council, was the Alaska representative for Save Our Wild Salmon Coalition, and he was the 2012 recipient of Alaska Conservation Foundation's Olas Murie Award for outstanding professional contributions to conservation. I'm excited to have Tim with us today, and this afternoon we'll be learning about Tim, his passion for conservation, and the initiatives and campaigns going on at SalmonState. Welcome, Tim.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it.
Well, I'm delighted to have you here. Let's talk a little bit about Tim Bristol. Where are you from?
Boy, you could have picked a little more interesting topic than that. But anyway, longtime conservationist here in Alaska. Born and raised in between Buffalo, New York and Niagara Falls, New York, in a town, North Tonawanda, on the banks of the Niagara River. And
all right, so a New Englander.
Well, I would say a Great Lakes Rust Belt guy.
Okay.
So we're about 400 miles from New England. So yeah, just upriver from the infamous Love Canal, the neighborhood
Indeed.
That was abandoned in the early 80s because of toxic waste contamination. And, I think that's what sort of directed me in some ways towards conservation. One, my dad taking me fishing and hunting when I was a kid and really falling in love with that. It was, the highlight of the year to go out and have some of those camping trips and those outdoor excursions. And then getting a little bit older and realizing that I'm living along the banks of all the water essentially from the Great Lakes flowing through this river, going out eventually to the ocean, and growing up with fish consumption warnings and having an entire neighborhood that was raised and buried and put inside a toxic landfill, and realizing that something was really out of whack. And then when I was in college, I made my way to Alaska to work in a salmon cannery one summer and was completely blown away by what I witnessed, just sort of the productivity of Ketchikan Creek flowing through Ketchikan with all the return of the pink salmon and bald eagles everywhere and whales and signs of bears. And then all these people just spending all of their waking hours fishing, chasing fish, cutting down trees. It was just, all these issues that were already really interesting to me were just right in my face all the time. And after finishing up school, I moved back to Alaska for good, 93, and fell into conservation.
Where'd you go to school?
Buffalo State College.
Buffalo State College. What's their mascot?
The Bengals. Such a strange.
All right.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah, that one's. Yeah.
Yeah, strange mascot.
So. Upstate New York, Great Lakes region, Iron Belt, to Alaska. You took a somewhat circuitous route to where you are today. Tell us a little bit about that. You got a lot of awards, did a lot of different things.
Yeah, I originally came to Alaska. I wanted to be an environmental reporter. I was a journalism major, and I realized pretty quickly that I wanted to move beyond the he said, she said approach to conservation issues and really dig in deeper. Sort of the story is fairly typical for those of us who weren't born and raised in Alaska. You sort of show up here and you think you're going to give it 6 months, and then before you know it, it's a couple of decades have passed or more. And I ended up applying for a job with the Southeast Alaska Conservation Council, and eventually ended up there. And I just knew that the issues that were really prominent at the time, management of our largest national forest, the Tongass, was something I wanted to be involved in. And for me, it was, I couldn't even believe they were paying me right away. Honestly, I had this incredible mentor, a guy named Bart Kohler, who was really just a master of grassroots organizing and understanding how people responded to issues. He really understood the human aspect of environmentalism, and really, essentially, the only thing Bart told us was an absolute stone cold, ironclad requirement was to get out of the office and talk to as many different people of as many different backgrounds as possible, figure out their connection to this incredible region, Southeast Alaska, this forest of islands, and then figure out how we could bring them into the fold, bring them to our side, which was to reform the way we logged, the way we managed this national forest, move it away from road building and logging to something that was more sustainable. Logging can and probably will be a component of the forest management moving forward, but at a much smaller scale and done in balance with all the other things that this forest provides: fisheries and recreation and tourism and customary and traditional harvest by indigenous people. And just, really trying to find a more sustainable, balanced way of living here. So that was a really incredible experience. And I did that for 5 years and learned a lot about meeting people where they're at and grassroots organizing and how these issues play out in a resource state, in a red resource state. And I guess I was just hooked after that, and have stayed in the business, so to speak, since.
So journalism, interesting. It seems to me that a lot of people who come to the advocacy side of the business have a proclivity to journalism, whether they went to school or not. And I mean, you think about people who have endured in this business, in the advocacy business. I think about Chris Wood, for example, who, but others who latched on to the secret sauce, if you will, and you can disagree with me here, but that learning to tell stories, learning to, as you said, meet people where they are, have a true interest in their experience, has helped a number of people become good advocates. Do you think that's still true?
I do. That's actually, I've never really heard it crystallized that way, but it makes sense to me. And Chris was another really great boss that taught me a lot. And he's such a great writer, and he's such a great storyteller. And yeah, I think that's a really good way of describing it. And putting yourselves in the perspectives of other people. You might have a premise, you might have a basic sort of thesis, but then you quickly turn and try to gather information, try to understand other perspectives and mold it into something that is presentable to the greater public. So yeah, I think it does lend itself to advocacy.
So part of the reason we do these Waterside Chats is to expose our audiences to different people who are in the business, if you will. We had Chris Milgate, who's a filmmaker, and we had Mark Titus, who started in the salmon cannery, much like you. I know you know Mark, but is a storyteller. And to me, from the network's point of view, is we're, I think, facing a sea change, or at least a tide change in advocacy in this country, that being able to explain to people the notion that storytelling is probably one of the best ways to become an advocate, and that you don't have to be a lawyer or steeped in the nuances of legislative craftsmanship to be able to help people understand why certain things are important. And we'll get to the certain things that you're involved in, but do you find that like would it make sense to be being a trainer to train those people to be advocates by using that storytelling frame or
Yeah,
approach?
I think right now the showing rather than telling is critical. I That's not to minimize scientists, lawyers, researchers, but I do agree with you that we are experiencing a tide change, like a Cook Inlet size tide change,
Uh-huh.
a really big tide change, and again, being able to illustrate or color these issues in ways that are appealing and provocative to people is I think of critical importance right now. There's just no doubt about it. And SalmonState, where I work now, hopefully we'll talk a little bit more about that. We really see ourselves as communicators and connectors and conveners. That's really our what we're best at.
So tell me a little bit about SalmonState. How did it get started? How did you wind up there? What's its mission? And then we'll talk some of them about the campaigns.
Okay, so SalmonState's 10 years old now. I was the program director for Trout Unlimited, and it was a great experience. I loved working for Chris Wood and TU. At that time, a foundation, the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, which had invested a lot in protecting wild salmon, was doing some work to really measure, test Alaskans and Americans' affinity for wild salmon, and did some focus group work and some polling work, and realized that for Alaskans, salmon was up there with jobs and education as far as the things that really animated people, the things they were willing to take action on. And so was able to take some support from the Moore Foundation and some other foundations, leave Trout Unlimited, which was not an easy decision.
Sure.
Just to work on something that was maybe a little bit more ecumenical. I loved having salmon in the name, and working very closely with a broad cross section of Alaskans. Not that we didn't do that at Trout, but really even try to broaden out it even more to indigenous communities and commercial fishing interests and salmon marketers and community leaders and those kind of things. And then really sort of dive into that Alaskan love for salmon, and then turn it into advocacy and action. And mostly that manifests itself in habitat protection, trying to promote good policies and practices. And then, as we talked at the outset, telling the stories of people who care about and depend upon wild salmon. And it turns out that's a really rich vein to mine for stories and testimonials and tributes to wild Alaska. So
Awesome.
yeah, it's been super fun.
SalmonState has, if I'm correct, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 campaigns, right?
Depending on the day, yeah.
Yeah. Well, the ones that at least in doing my research, the ones I saw on the website, right? You've got 5 campaigns going. I definitely want to talk about Bristol Bay, but because you run the show, I'm going to let you pick among your children first to tell us about the one that you think is probably the one that's the most exciting to work on. And then I'll come to the one that keeps you up at night. And then maybe talk a little bit about a couple of them that might not be as well known. So let's start the one that's the most exciting.
Well, I think I need you to do that, Tom, because if I pick one, then someone on staff is going to be resentful. So you go.
All right.
You go ahead.
Then, all right. Then I'm gonna pick bycatch.
Okay.
So tell us about the bycatch campaign.
Well, it's incredibly challenging. So right now we have a situation in the federal waters off of Alaska. The harvest of pollock, which is turned into surimi, fake crab, fillet fish sandwiches, fish sticks. I would submit it's gotten out of control. So you have these football field length nets that drag through the water column and oftentimes end up on the bottom. So they end up dragging on the bottom to catch incredibly large amounts of pollock. The problem is they catch everything else. It's in the net's path at the same time. So that includes salmon, Chinook salmon, chum salmon in particular, black cod, halibut, herring, all the other things that make Alaska's marine life so diverse and productive, and also is the source of directed small boat commercial fishing operations, and then customary and traditional harvest by indigenous people, and then charter boat fishermen, and then resident sport anglers like myself. Over the past 7 years, the average poundage of bycatch has been about 141 million pounds. So we're talking a lot of waste associated with this fishery. The challenge is pollock has become very lucrative. They have an incredible amount of influence over decision making that's made by the North Pacific Fisheries Management Council that calls the shots under Magnus and Stevens. I'm sure your audience knows at least or more about it than I do. And it has really bycatch has become a 4-letter word up here with the average Alaskan.
Really?
There's a lot of biology, there's a lot of numbers thrown back and forth, but at the end of the day, for the person who lives here, they really understand the idea of waste. It's really basic stuff, right? Take only what you need, use everything that you take, and try not to have a negative impact on other users. And trawling is definitely not adhering to those values, and it's become a pretty hot button political issue that touches across a lot of different sectors of society. Indigenous people in Western Alaska, the Yukon, and the Kuskokwim are in crisis. There's no Chinook salmon fishing for the next 7 years on the Yukon. Chum salmon numbers have plummeted. Now you're starting to see those spin-off effects into other fisheries, and it's not just salmon. The commercial directed halibut fishery and the charter boat fishery for halibut is being severely impacted. The body that governs how much halibut is harvested in national and international waters, they just took another 15% cut this year. It's going to be one of the worst halibut seasons in about 40 years. So you're starting to see this cascading series of effects, and clearly some of it, maybe even a lot of it, is due to climate change. But the one thing we do have control over right now, the one thing where we actually still have our hand on the throttle, is the amount of bycatch that we allow. And it feels like that we're having a very difficult time getting the North Pacific Fisheries Management Council to make decisions in real time. They continue to sort of want to study the issue, kick the can down the road, wait for a while before they make any decisions that could affect the bottom line trawlers. And I feel like we're getting to the point where the pollock fishery and trawling has become too big to fail. And our policy prescriptions, our requests for redress are just, they're running headlong into economic concerns that are frankly in a large part outside of the state of Alaska.
Explain that a little bit. Expand on that for me.
Well, most of the boats that are prosecuting this fishery are based out of Seattle. We actually had a situation where the nominee for the council, one of the more recent nominees for the council from Governor Jay Inslee in Washington State, was a really rock solid conservationist, Becca Robbins Giskler, who works for the Ocean Conservancy. And somewhere between the recommendation from Governor Inslee and ratification by the Secretary of Commerce, she was not selected. And she was replaced, or the same old person that represents trawl interests ended up back on the council. And I thought that was, who knows exactly what happened there, but there was clearly some high level political pressure that led that to decision. It was deeply disappointing to us. We thought it was really time to have someone who represented an interest that was bigger and broader than just a segment of the commercial fishery on the council, and that didn't happen. That was deeply disappointing. And we keep seeing those kind of things happen, and it's really become disconcerting. We just had a 10-day meeting to talk about whether we could set a hard cap on the number of chum salmon that are allowed to be bycaught in this fishery before we essentially either shut down the trawling fishery or make them move someplace else where we see fewer impacts. They talked about it for 10 days and they couldn't come up with a decision. So, and it's just because the basic reasoning from the industry at this point is, well, if you make us do that, we're going to take a huge financial hit, and we can't do that.
Wow. Where do you go from here?
That's a really good question, or it's a really tough question, and I guess that gets to your your question of what keeps me up at night. Is I don't know if we have a really good idea at this point. At some point, we're probably going to need to reopen Magnuson-Stevens, the Fisheries Act, and take a hard look at that. And I know that that's a very difficult hill to climb. I think it's continue to reach out to our elected officials. Our recently elected Nick Begich, our lone representative, and our Sullivan and Murkowski, and ask for them to do more. They frankly have not done enough to this point. So I think it's political, it's legislative, and then just do the slow, steady grind of trying to improve policy. Although maybe there's some other things out there, some consumer education. That there's a price to be paid for your fillet of fish sandwich. So those are all things we're considering. And then in the meantime, it's that communicating and connecting we do, and just trying to build a bigger base of support, a stronger, louder chorus of concern, and getting that out into the public sphere.
Well, no question, bycatch is going to be one of the great challenges, both on the ground or on the water out there, and then here in DC. As you said, opening Magnuson is probably a little bit more challenging now than it was 5 years ago. So,
right.
Go ahead. The other one that probably the first time you and I got to know each other was back when we were dealing with the early assault on Bristol Bay. There have been disconcerting rumors floating around. Tell us about the Bristol Bay campaign from your perspective up there.
Well, I mean, hopefully it's a model for other campaigns in other places moving forward. It's a really diverse set of stakeholders and interests that were concerned about the construction of a large-scale open pit gold and copper mine at the headwaters of the most productive wild sockeye salmon fishery in the world, Bristol Bay. A few years ago, we had 72 million sockeye returned to the bay, maybe the biggest run ever. So It's a real success story of not only preserving and protecting a resource, but managing it well. Right? They harvest up to half of the run every year, and it's proven sustainable. So this isn't a museum. This is a working ecosystem that's been shown to be in balance with human needs, and it's sort of a model of what we should be doing. And then honestly, when you look at the Bristol Bay region, about 85% of the residents are indigenous, and they have done one incredible job of protecting that resource. So I think it's just an example of, and then the rest of us piled in: conservationists, commercial fishermen, hunters and anglers, people who want to go see bears, people across the political spectrum, Republicans and Democrats. So I hopefully that's a sort of a template for what we should be trying to do now, because I think there's some big conservation challenges in front of us and a few more just over the horizon. But that issue's been back and forth throughout the years. There was action by the EPA that was initiated under the Obama administration. Some of that EPA action was set aside during the first Trump years, but when confronted with a permit application from the mining company, the Trump first Trump administration's Army Corps of Engineers rejected that permit, and that was something to really celebrate. And I hope that that is the kind of environmental action that helps set the table for the second Trump administration. Displaying that this is in the national interest and it's bipartisan and it's good for America and Americans. And then during the Biden administration, they resurrected and then finished off some of those EPA protections that really they rejected the dredge and fill permit that was required to build the giant pit for the mine. And we'll see what happens. The mining company sued over that decision, and it'll be up to the Department of Justice under the Trump administration whether they defend that decision in court or not. And that's I think that's, when you talk about some of the rumors swirling out there, that could be one of the things, whether they continue to defend that in court or not. So that remains to be seen.
Yeah. This is the issue of anyone who's paid any attention to the two words Bristol Bay know this has been going on for
a long
time. and there was a certain amount of relief a couple of years ago. But I think those of us who have been doing this as long as we've been doing this never believe it. And I'm afraid our nightmares may be coming true again. Canada is in the news today. Yep. And this is an issue that I don't understand particularly well. So let me have you talk a little bit about the Salmon Without Borders campaign.
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of Canada. I'll say at the outset.
Sure.
I grew up in a border town. I grew up on Canadian television, Hockey Night in Canada. I go to visit. You go to the Yukon Territory. It's a backyard playground for people here in Juneau every year. But on the issue of mining and mineral exploration on shared rivers that flow from northern British Columbia into southeast Alaska, Canada stinks. They've been just a lousy neighbor. So the northern reaches of British Columbia, they serve as the headwaters of the Unic, the Stikine, and the Taku, which flow into southeast Alaska at the Taku at Juneau, Stikine at Rango, and the Unic behind Ketchikan. Huge salmon drivers, big, beautiful, wild watersheds. And on the U.S. side of the border, the mouths of those rivers are all in some kind of protected or non-development status. But northern British Columbia, the BC government has decided to turn the transboundary region, the headwaters of these rivers, into a huge mining district. They've renamed it the Golden Triangle. They spend an enormous amount of taxpayer money to promote mineral exploration and just to send transmission lines up there to provide power to some of these mines. You can stake mineral claims online in British Columbia.
Oh my goodness.
It's unbelievable, and we found that we've done some research and found there's a lot of shady operators that stake mineral claims and then essentially turn the receipts into the provincial government in British Columbia to get reimbursed. And they just they crank out these press releases about the great new development. But there are a few of these mines that are moving into development stage, and then there's a couple that are in operation. And if anything, the mining rules and regulations in Canada are less strict than they are in the United States. There's really no bonding and reclamation requirements. In British Columbia a few years ago, for those of you who have been following any of this at all, there was a catastrophe on a mine in southern British Columbia, the Mount Poly mine, where the tailings impoundment just gave way and waste ended up flowing into the Fraser River. We have mines proposed or in operation in these watersheds that we share between the two countries of similar design. And we're really worried that BC is not doing enough to safeguard downstream interests. There is a treaty between the two countries, the Boundary Waters Treaty, where we're not supposed to pollute each other's waters. And we don't feel that the Canadians have done a good job of meeting both the spirit and the letter of that. So we've been calling for some kind of international framework, like the International Joint Commission you have around the Great Lakes, to deal with this issue, and Canada's been wholly resistant to that. This is an issue where Senator Murkowski has been outstanding. She's really pushed hard for some kind of international framework. Senator Sullivan has been good as well. And, to be perfectly frank, I think we have as good an opportunity or a better opportunity under the Trump administration than we did the Biden administration to move forward with some kind of decisive action here, because we need it. As my coworker Heather Hardcastle has said, she grew up on the Taku in a commercial fishing family where sitting ducks in upriver are ticking time bombs.
Yeah. And I don't think, I certainly, as I said at the start, I have not paid that much attention to this. And it was just recently in a conversation with Brian Bennett about the Fraser and I think what brought it home to me was the Mount Poly catastrophe, which, is when people say, well, why are you worried about a tailings mine in Bristol Bay? And all you have to do is point to that and say, that's what it's going to look like. And it's not if, it's when that's going to happen. There's just, and to saddle ourselves with that ticking time bomb, as your colleague Heather says, is just, it's irresponsible. So maybe maybe this conundrum, the kerfuffle that we have going on with our colleagues to the north, maybe give us an opportunity to at least get some attention to this as well.
Yep.
Tongass. Again, one of the ones that, Rob Vandermark and I, in our early days, were involved in timbering issues, and this was obviously a TU one. So tell me a little bit about the Southeast Alaska Tongass campaign.
Yeah, and that has had many chapters, even more than the Bristol Bay campaign.
Yeah.
And largest national forest in the country at 17 million acres, giant salmon producer, Admiralty Island, which is just a little more than the stone's throw from where I'm sitting here today, has 1,000 brown bears in the island. Tlingit name for that is Kutsnuwu Bear Fortress. Just an unbelievably productive and beautiful part of the country. It's become an enormous, very popular tourist destination. It really is this very wonderful place to live. The recreation and outdoors activities are second to none. Then there's been a big struggle over how to manage this forest for a long, it's the size of West Virginia, it's big. It's been a struggle for a long time how to manage it. For a long time, the primary mission of the Forest Service, which oversees this huge landscape, was to produce timber that went to two pulp mills, one in Sitka and one in Ketchikan. They had contracts with the federal government that guaranteed them 50 years of wood. What we realized after a couple of decades was the amount of wood that was demanded by the mills could not be sustained by this forest and still, take care of all the other forest uses, fishery production and wildlife and quality of life and those kind of things. And that's where I started out as a grassroots organizer. I was working on issues of reforming Forest Service management in the Tongass. And fast forward into a couple of months ago, we were really in a different place. We're looking at creating a forest plan based on renewable resource values and the primary drivers of the economy, which were very different than in the past. Logging is less than 0.5% of overall employment. I do think that we are in for some choppy water ahead. The Forest Service's ability to craft and to build that plan, that blueprint for this huge forest with many communities surround, in and around it, is going to be greatly diminished due to budget cuts and job losses. And the president just signing an executive order saying we need to get more wood out of the forest. So I'm worried that we go back to some of the timber wars of the past. That said, the political desire the societal desire to go back to that here in Southeast Alaska is just not there. People don't want large scale timber operations. They don't want a bunch of road building into wild salmon producing watersheds. They will probably accept a certain level of logging done in a sustainable way with a focus on creating semi-finished and finished products that we can export out of these regions. So we maximize the value and maximize the jobs per board foot cut. But going back to that, getting all rhetorical and saying that we just need to loosen the environmental protections or restrictions, depending on your perspective, and letting them have at it with the chainsaws, that's not going to pass political muster here. So, I think for us, since the Forest Service is going to be hamstrung to a certain degree, there's a lot of us that have spent a lot of time from across the political and social spectrum about what it is we want and done the research, and it's going to be up to us to go out and sell some kind of plan that works for us and maybe appeal to our congressional delegation, say, like, is there a different way of doing things so we're not caught between these two poles of hardcore left-right politics?
Yeah, I mean, the Tongass, I thought one of the great descriptions, and probably credited to you, frankly, is that it was the salmon forest, right?
Trout Unlimited has long carried that mantle. My former coworker Mark Kelke and Mark Hieronymus at Trout Unlimited, they were doing a lot of really deep research into watersheds that were slated for logging and road building, and started to look at the salmon, trout, steelhead values of those, and it's like, these are just unbelievably productive. It would be just a catastrophe to allow these to be, logged and single use, one time only, when they can continue to produce fish over and over and over again. And you take that in total and aggregate, and it really is a salmon forest. Thousands of salmon streams here.
And the, as you mentioned, the economic values of the outdoor recreation now are very different than they were 25 years, or the recognition of those values. That's changed, and hopefully carries some weight.
I mean, it should, if it's dollars and cents and jobs.
Right.
It absolutely should. It far outstrips anything that's contributed or would be contributed by large scale logging and road building.
When is there a forest management plan timeline that you guys are working on?
Well, I think that's all been disrupted, right?
Okay.
Over the last few weeks. And honestly, the Biden administration didn't move as quickly as they should have. I mean, if they would have started early on, I think we would be bringing the plane in for a landing, but for a lot of reasons that didn't happen. So now I think that all those timelines are up in the air, and it's going to be about, again, getting out and talking with a broad cross section of the populace here, telling stories of how people use this place in a renewable, responsible way, and then delivering that to a national audience, right? Because it is a national forest, and we all are partial owners and all have a say in its ownership. And, probably we'll be asking people to write to their elected officials saying, I want a big, wild, productive Tongass, not a single-use Tongass. That traditionally has also cost the American taxpayer a lot of money. The timber program here just hemorrhaged money. It didn't turn a profit.
Yeah. Well, and we really don't need to be turning good wood into pulpwood, right?
Right.
Right. I'm cognizant of the time, Tim, but I'm gonna butcher the name here. Susitna. Yeah,
so the Susitna River drains out of the Alaska Range, Denali, and into Cook Inlet, fourth largest salmon producer in the state. There is a push by the state of Alaska right now to build an industrial access road up into the western portion of this really big watershed. It's totally wild, highly productive. It would go to a private mineral claim owned by a couple of foreign mining companies. We just think it's a bad idea. And so we're working with local stakeholders to prevent it. The Susitna was also, they also proposed building the largest hydro dam in the United States in the last 50 years on the Susitna. And, the argument was we need the energy and the dam is going to be above where any wild salmon spawn. So it's not a problem. And well, we all know that that's just a tiny bit of the equation there. And a great grassroots campaign pushed back against that. And for now that proposal is on the back burner. But this industrial access road, so we're working with a pretty diverse group of people to prevent construction of this access road to a mine. So that's a Susitna campaign.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So from Alaska, from beautiful Alaska, sunny Juneau to the dark halls of Congress, do you guys have work going on in Washington?
Almost all of these issues have some kind of federal policy play, right? The Tongass, it's a national forest, so it's going to be largely driven by executive orders and legislative action by Congress. The transboundary issue, that is at the State Department level.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, Pebble, again, there's a huge federal interface there with the Clean Water Act and Army Corps of Engineers permits. So yes, the Susitna campaign, it's more, will there be money appropriated from the United States Congress that could be used for that access road? Our governor, I think it's really short-sighted. Our governor has taken money that could be used for other much more important transportation needs and has siphoned it towards this single-use private road. So there's probably some education to do there. And then with the trawl issue with bycatch, those are federally managed fisheries. So
right.
Again, yeah, you can't talk about the big issues in Alaska without mixing it up with the U.S. Congress and the White House. So all of these issues, which start local, end up becoming national and in some cases international. It's one of the big challenges, but also one of the things that always keeps it really interesting here.
For sure. Sometimes more interesting than we care to have it be.
Yeah. Keeps us busy.
Will you be coming to DC?
I suspect so at some point. Although there are better, more compelling spokespeople than myself. And I think over the years, what we've tried to do is enlist, I'll just say average citizens with deep cultural, personal, and economic interests in these landscapes to carry the message. And, that can be very effective. And that's sort of the program we'll continue to sort of implement here. So
for folks who want to support all of these campaigns, or if they have favorites, what's the best way to get in touch? What's the best way for them to do that besides sending you big checks, which we can all use? What would you encourage them to do?
Yeah, just go to our website and then sign up for our social media feeds. We're on Blue Sky, we're on Instagram, Facebook. We're not on X anymore.
Yeah. How do you like Blue Sky?
It's fine. Yeah, it's pretty good. Although good. I at this point, we're posting a lot and I end up liking and loving our posts. So
yeah.
Trying to drive more energy and activity there.
Well, I'll make sure that I am following you on Blue Sky.
Thank you.
I was an early adopter and I saw it as a great, and I was delighted to see our journalist colleagues start flocking to Blue Sky. So
exactly.
Tim, it's great to see you. Been a great conversation. Appreciate more than I can say the work you guys are doing. Obviously, we care. We're willing to help. Keep us informed. I ask if you're coming to DC, let us know so that we can.
Will do.
Share a meal, share a cup of coffee on the Hill, whatever it takes. But it's been a joy over the years to know you. I know Rob shares my feeling about that. We've worked together on things. Now more than ever, having good storytellers being out there telling these stories and doing the education is terrifically important. and I really appreciate it. If there's anything I miss that you want to, this is the time to plug whatever I miss or anything else you'd care to.
No, thank you for the time and the good work of the network, and yeah, to be continued, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, we may call on you for a little bit of tutorials on good storytelling, because that is something that the network has really begun to focus our attention on. Beyond the policy, it's really doing the work just like you've been describing. So I appreciate that, and we look forward to working together on some of that.
yeah, no, that sounds great.
All right. Well, good. Well, I think that does it for this chat, and perhaps we'll get you back for another one. We'll see where things go in the near future. And our next chat's in the process of getting scheduled. So you'll see notice for that going out. And from there, I'd say thank you very much.
Thanks again. Take care.
If you enjoyed this episode of Waterside Chat, share it with your friends and colleagues. You can check us out on YouTube or most podcast services. To stay up to date on Waterside Chats and the Marine Fish Conservation Network, sign up for emails at conservefish.org. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you at the next Waterside Chat.